Welcome back to the Childhood Cancer Perspective, and thank you all for sticking with me through this incredible journey. One of the biggest things that I always start off every episode with is talking about how social media is really a love-hate relationship. It allows us to not only reach the masses with one voice, but it also allows us to meet and network with a lot of different people. But it also can be kind of hindering because it doesn't allow us to share our full story without censoring us in some way. So the podcast has always given us a way to kind of speak freely. So today, my guest is somebody that I was able to meet through TikTok, and which again, love-hate relationship with TikTok, but it does allow me to meet cool people. So Kiala is with me today. She's going to tell her story of pediatric cancer and being a survivor. So you're here. So Kiala, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. I was diagnosed with leukemia when I was 2 years old, and that was a lot of like back and forth between doctors, and then trying to tell my mom that she was hormonal, dramatic, everything that they can make an excuse for to not really treat me. Somehow, I don't know the full story on that, but an oncologist was working where I think I was in the ER I know I was at a military hospital. I think he was working at the ER and decided to take a look at me, and he realized that this wasn't just a dramatic 2-year-old or like a hormonal overdramatic mother. And he ended up taking my mom seriously and diagnosed me with leukemia. At the time, he didn't know what leukemia, which type of leukemia it was. He knew it was acute, and that's from what I've heard, that's what happened. And then he didn't think I was going to survive that night. And so obviously I did end up surviving that night, and they continued to monitor me today. But because of all the chemo and the bone marrow transplant, I have a lot of effects, which I've noticed a lot of people don't ever talk about the after of childhood cancer. They only really talk about the treatment, and then a lot of people think, oh, the treatment's done, so you're fine now, you're cured, you're good, when that's just not the truth for majority of childhood cancer survivors.
I think you're very right. Everybody, we kind of think up till, I think it's kind of an unfortunate side effect of all of this is we kind of think up to 5 years. And once you get to that 5-year mark, we don't really think about what happens later on in life. All of, the cancer itself, but also the treatments can cause a lot of different side effects that you are living with for the rest of your life. So you have your life, you have your future, but you're dealing with what you had to go through and the visible part of all of that. We'll get into kind of the lasting side effects and things like that, but tell us about the treatments that you had to go through and what you remember about that.
So I don't remember a whole bunch of the treatments. I know it was a lot of treatments, and I joked about one of them with my cardiologist. I said, I don't remember which one it is, but I know it sounded like asparagus. That's all I remember about that one. And then they were trying to get me to the point of a bone marrow transplant. Because as far as they were concerned, I was going to die. I had a 4% chance of survival, and they just wanted to get me to the point of a bone marrow transplant. So, and my dad told me my doctor said that it was lethal amounts of chemo. And so they did get me to a point of a bone marrow transplant, but they couldn't find a match for me. They tried to test my sister, but she wasn't a match. And they ended up finding cord blood, which was a match. And I had GVHD. I don't remember a whole lot of what happened with that, but now I do know that now I'm good. And I actually celebrated my 21st transplant birthday in November. So I'm really grateful to the mother who donated her son's cord blood, because that saved my life. And I would love to meet them, but unfortunately, due to laws of us both being a minor at the time of the donation and the time I received it, I cannot meet the family ever, which I really wish I could. And they did IVIG for years after the chemo and the transplant to try to rebuild my immune system. In 2000, I think it was 2012 was my last treatment of IVIG. I think they said that there wasn't really a point in continuing anymore because it wasn't really doing much for me anymore. And I have gone since 2012 without any more IVIG. Right now, they're talking about restarting immunotherapy, but it wouldn't be IVIG. But I was monitored by oncology. I'm still monitored by oncology and very closely. They didn't think I'd ever get to being able to see them just once a year, but I have been able to see them once a year.
And listen, I'm ecstatic that you're at the point that you are now, because so many families, so many children don't get to that level or get to that point in their life when they're able to kind of get into adulthood and get into kind of moving on and not letting your diagnosis define you, but definitely not forgetting how you got here and what you had to go through to get here. So tell us about kind of what you, as an adult now, kind of what your side effects are now that you're living with that came from the treatments that you had or came from over the years?
So I've been dealing with the side effects pretty much my entire life. And one of the bigger ones that they've been working with me on is my immune system. It's been kind of weird. Right now they think that what's happening, so I have a pretty much non-existent IgA level and my IgG level is low. And they think it's because the bone marrow didn't recover certain cells correctly, which is normal for a bone marrow to do after a transplant. So what they usually do for that is IVIG, and then they also have a different form of immunotherapy. I can't remember the name of that because we're still, this is a new thing I'm hearing about, that they want to try to not really recover my IgA levels, because you can't, as of right now, there's nothing they can do to fully recover IgA. All of that is experimental. So they're hoping to boost my IgG levels, which could help my IgA. The other one is I've had a lot of dental issues. I'm missing, I've had 8 teeth pulled, and I think I'm missing 10 that just never grew in from the chemo. And I did a few years of wearing a retainer. I think it was like 5 or 7 years of wearing braces. And their goal was to do a jaw surgery so they could add an implant, so I could have my back teeth. So because I have a low bone density from the chemo, and because of missing teeth, I had 2 centimeters of jaw when you're supposed to have 8 centimeters of jaw. And they had to do bone grafting to add in so they could put the implants in. But on my right upper jaw, there was a nerve sitting in the way of one of the implants. So they couldn't, if they hit that nerve, I'd probably lose feeling in my jaw permanently. There is a chance it could recover, but it wasn't a risk they were willing to take. So they went around the nerve and drilled up to like my sinus bone to try to add in the implant. But unfortunately, the bone grafting they used rejected, and they can't, and it left a hole in my skull. So they can't go back and do the surgery again. Otherwise, it could risk the hole being bigger. In the lower jaw, it wouldn't take the implants, but it took the bone grafting. So now I have to wear partial dentures because I don't have my back molars except for wisdom teeth that are acting as back molars right now. The other one I have is POTS. And I was talking to my cardiologist about it when I was first diagnosed, and he said it's actually a very common side effect for pretty much any cancer survivor, whether they're a child or an adult, to develop POTS after chemo. And it's basically, I think it's called dysautonomia. It's basically your body constantly thinks it's dehydrated when it's not dehydrated, and the symptoms get worse the more you move around and you do things. And the ways to treat it are medication, which is usually a beta blocker, electrolytes in your water, and salt. And they actually tell you to increase your salt intake, which is weird because a lot of times cardiologists say decrease your salt intake. I actually had my doctor tell me just carry a bag of potato chips with you. There isn't much else they can do for POTS. I know that some people, if the condition gets worse, they go on IV fluids, but they try to not get to that point and help manage the symptoms that they are at so that you can hopefully live a relatively normal life. The other issues I've had is something called primary ovarian insufficiency, which is also, it's rare, but it's fairly common in childhood cancer survivors. It's when your ovarian function is either non-existent or very low, and it causes issues with the reproductive hormones. And a lot of people think that just means you have infertility and it doesn't really cause much else, but people don't understand the importance that hormones play in your body, even if they are things like estrogen and progesterone, which are usually just which are called reproductive hormones. It affects things like your vitamin D, your bone density, and I have to get my bone density because of it.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right with the infertility, because I know that with girls, a lot of times they will, within the chemo side effects, and I know it was with our daughter, you probably won't have kids. And that's really kind of how far they tell you about it. Like, that's what it's going to cause, that infertility issue. It doesn't tell you, they don't really talk about, the insufficiencies and any kind of hormones and stuff like that. It really stops there. There's not a lot of explanation, I think, when it comes to how deep the side effects go and what they affect outside of what their name is. Okay, you get the big ones, right? You may lose your hearing, you may lose your sight, you may lose the ability to have children. It can cause growth indeficiencies and your intellectual insufficiencies, all of that kind of stuff, but it doesn't really go into deep detail about that. So I'm actually glad that you said that, because, even for me, looking at it as a dad going through it with our daughter, was she probably just won't be able to have kids. Of which case they can go in and they can take, they can take sections of the ovaries, sections of things like that, and they can do it with boys too, not ovaries, obviously. And they can store that and freeze it so that you may be able to have kids later on in life. But it affects so much else. So I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah, and there's, oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead. Nope.
I also have a lot more issues, including learning disabilities. And then I have hearing loss in my right ear, and I'm visually impaired from optical nerve damage. But there's not really enough time to sit here all day and go through all of that. I joked around with a friend who also has a similar medical history to me, but we're like, our parents probably have a separate house to keep our medical records. But yeah, they don't talk. A lot of people want to talk about I don't know if it's they don't want to, or if they just don't understand the effects of like medical issues when it comes to hormones. It's like, yeah, okay, you won't have children. That is heartbreaking. And I was told that I have a 0.00, take as many zeros, 3% chance of being able to carry my own kid. And yes, that's heartbreaking, but there's also a lot more to it than just that. My hormones come from a bottle that I get at CVS. A lot of people think, oh, well, that's great because then that you're getting all your hormones. No, because it's artificial basically, and it causes issues like increased risk of ovarian cancer, increased risk of breast cancer, and low bone density, like I've already said. And then luckily I haven't had as many issues with my hormone stuff, but that's not the truth for everyone.
No, you're absolutely right. But another big one that you said, and another big side effect that, again, I don't think people really kind of take this all in as a kid, and especially look, you're an adult and you have hair, right? And you go to school and you have a job, so you must be okay, right? You must be perfect. Everything must be okay. You've gotten through all this, but the risk for you to be done with treatment, and this is something that obviously is going to happen to a lot of families when they get to a point of that 5-year mark, right? Here is your risk of secondary cancers from the treatment. And that's another thing that people don't cover enough, and that's something that, and I don't mean to, make anybody feel bad. I don't mean to make you feel bad, but you are at risk for the rest of your life from those treatments causing a secondary issue, and I think it causes a lot of people, honestly, to reflect and to go back and say, but what if I didn't do anything? You know what I mean? Like, what if I didn't treat it? What if my parents didn't treat it? How would my life have been? What if I didn't go through these treatments that were our only option at that time? What would be my life now? Would I be dealing with as much? The answer is we truly don't know. And that's the issue with pediatric cancers. We just don't know enough about the ifs and the ands and all those questions. But we do know, number one, and I think you are very on point to talk about it more, is what you deal with later on in life, what you deal with after you're quote unquote okay, right? Quote unquote, you're done with treatment. You can move on. How do you deal with that? How do you move forward with it?
So I have doctor appointments at least once a month for something. And I work full time as a preschool teacher. And it's difficult because I'm having to sit down a lot more because I feel myself getting dizzy. And so I'm sitting down. And luckily, I'm a preschool teacher, so if I just sit down on the floor, no one's going to question it. I also find myself having to take more days off work, or asking about having to leave early of certain days because I have another doctor appointment. Luckily, I was able to find a great therapist who's been able to help me with navigating those emotions and stuff revolving around that. I also have very understanding people in my life, which I'm very blessed with, who have helped me and not made me feel like I'm an inconvenience or something for needing to take extra time or lay down after work because I'm too tired to do anything else. And then anytime I have a new symptom, which is all the time, I'm in the doctor's, and one of the first things they want to do is do blood work to see if there's anything that can indicate leukemia coming back, because leukemia likes to present in the most random ways. So that's, in my mind, though, I'm not too scared of a secondary cancer because I am very closely monitored, but I also just, my mind kind of blocked off the idea of a secondary cancer and has just kind of chosen me nope, we're not thinking about that. So I don't know if it's lucky there or not, or if it's just in denial, but I also have really understanding coworkers who have helped me out, and I've been able to say, hey, maybe you should go home for today because you don't look okay. And I also have been able to find accommodations. I can take a chair, like I bring a chair, drag a chair over and just sit there for a bit. I go on break and I just kind of pretty much lay down in like 2 chairs for a minute. Dealing with it, it's hard because some doctors don't understand the after of cancer. And I've noticed when you get into adulthood, when I was a kid, I was seeing all the pediatric doctors. They all took it a lot more seriously. They're like, oh, you have a history of cancer. Here's all the effects that could happen. But then I became an adult and I started seeing adult doctors, and they're like, I had a neurologist tell me, well, you had cancer like when you were 2, the chemo shouldn't affect you anymore. That's how it works. The farther you out from the chemo, the less chance you have of effects from it. I was like, can't say anything when it comes to cancer in adulthood, but when it comes to childhood, that's not how that works. In fact, there's a lot of evidence showing that as a childhood cancer survivor enters adulthood, they're far more likely to develop effects from the chemo.
Yeah, no, and again, not to put fear into anybody at all, but some of those late term side effects, they linger, right? They don't come out, they don't present themselves right away, but there's a risk of them later on in life. There's like a super high chance that I think it's almost 95% of childhood cancer survivors are going to develop something later on in life that could be attributed to the treatments and the cancer that they dealt with as a child. It's not something that you can just brush off and say, now you've made it into adulthood, we can just forget everything that happened prior and move on. And again, that comes from the medical community, not doing a bad job, but not having the correct tools in their toolbox to completely understand exactly what we've got going on, exactly what kids deal with every single day, and how it transitions into later on in life.
Yeah, I went to rheumatology because I was experiencing a lot of joint pain. And I was talking to him about my medical history, and he says, it was like one of my first times seeing a doctor who specializes in adult medicine. And I was like, so I have a history of cancer. I went through a bone marrow transplant, chemo, and he was like, well, I don't really need to know that because that was so long ago. And I was talking to my oncologist about that because I still have to see pediatric oncology. And he said, and the nurse who was with him said, I've had so many adult patients tell me the same thing, that they are having trouble with getting taken seriously because the chemo was so long ago, and that's just not how that works. And I just wish I could go and talk to all these adult specialists and tell them how this actually is. And she said, I feel like it's not even like the fault of necessarily them, but the medical system not teaching about how not even just childhood cancer, but childhood illnesses follow you into adulthood.
Right. No, you're 100% right. You almost have to think about it like you can compare it to something that everybody knows, right? If you had, for me being in my 40s, I had chickenpox as a kid. Back before there was a vaccine, I had it. Therefore, the shingles virus is technically within me and it sits dormant. It may or may not come out at some point in my life. I may or may not deal with it, but that's something that happened in my childhood that could follow me into adulthood. Chemotherapy, going through a developing child, that is, your brain is developing, your body, your bones, all of that is developing, and it's going in and bulldozing things and changing things. And then yes, it is, that change is going to follow you throughout your life because those changes are now affected by that chemo. So again, you're right. And I think that it's not that they're doing a bad job. It's not that they don't know. It's that they don't have the training even to understand that. And you go in, there's a reason that there's a difference between adult medicine and pediatric medicine, because yes, we are still humans and we're people, but we're different. That's why there's a separation. That's why we need pediatric oncologists and adult oncologists, because children and adults are different. And that's kind of that separation of church and state that we need within this community. And people that say, well, I understand what you're going through because my grandmother had cancer. No, that's terrible. But you don't truly, because kids are different and they handle it different.
I've been told that a lot. They're like, well, my grandma or my great grandma's dog walker or some other thing had cancer. So I get it. And I'm like, okay, I can't sit here and talk to an adult who's going through cancer right now and tell them I understand what they're going through, because I can't feel like I can relate, because it was 2 different situations. And they're being treated with chemo, but overall they're also being treated differently. And we have different experiences. How can you relate when you yourself aren't going through it. And I think it's a different perspective. I'm not going to say that it's not just as difficult. It is difficult. I can't imagine watching someone you love go through that. That's something that is terrifying. But it's also not equivalent. It's like comparing apples to oranges. But like even with other cancer survivors, if they're diagnosed in adulthood, I find it a lot more difficult to relate with them because it's different. Because to me, my entire life has been cancer. Like, yes, I haven't had cancer my entire life, but I was diagnosed at such a young age. Everything has kind of been, oh, it's because of the cancer. It's because of the cancer. Everything correlates back to the cancer. Whereas then they're new to this. This is a new part of their life, and they have a time before that. So that's why I just don't understand when people say I can relate because of this.
Yeah. No, it's common, I think, and I think most people in the world can somehow relate to cancer in some way.
Mm-hmm.
A family member, even a pet, has cancer. We're all kind of connected to it in some way, but
And I think
it's
sorry.
No, I was just going to say, but it's just that everything is kind of on a different level. So,
Mm-hmm.
when you say I can relate, well, I appreciate that you want to relate or that you can empathize with what we're going through, but it's different. And let me tell you why. And that's what we need is let me tell you why it's different so that you can understand that you may understand cancer, but you don't understand how it affects kids differently. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the difference.
And I do think there needs to be more support out there for people who have family members or friends who are affected by cancer, because I think they also get forgotten a lot. And I think a lot of people I've noticed kind of want to blame someone for cancer, and a lot of times I think it is themselves. But I'm I've said a lot. I had cancer as a kid, and I never once have looked at my parents and been like, it's their fault, because it's not their fault. It was just unfortunate circumstances that happened, and it's, to me, just kind of a part of life. You live life, bad things are going to happen, and it's not necessarily someone's fault. And I feel like I've talked to a lot of other people who have been through cancer as a kid, like child cancer and stuff. They all say the same thing. I can't really blame my parents. It's not their fault. And they did all the things they could to support me. And there's unfortunately limited resources on what you can do to treat cancer.
You're absolutely right. And you hit on a topic that I think as parents, we're asking ourselves, but we're doing the blaming ourselves. We're blaming ourselves for it happening because we have one job, honestly, in this world, and that's to protect our kids. And this is that one thing that we can't see and we can't stop and we can't fix. But you're right in the fact that we will do anything that we can to make it better, to get them to the best places, to get you the best treatment. But we are very limited. We're very limited in our options, very limited in the protocols and the understanding and all of that when it comes to this disease, when it comes to affecting kids. And I can honestly say that myself, prior to our daughter being diagnosed in 2020, I was extremely ignorant to how prevalent pediatric cancer is. And I think a lot of people are. I think we're ignorant to the fact that you go into a children's hospital because your child has, a broken leg, or they have, something that they have to get fixed, but that there's a floor on that hospital that is strictly oncology, and it's kids fighting for their lives against something they cannot see. And I think that's why I do this, and that's why social media, and that's why our network is so important, to be able to share these stories and let people know how important it is that you really listen, that you really understand that it may not be personally affecting you, but you're not far from it. I often tell people that if you can go outside of your house and walk 10 houses either way, you will find somebody affected by pediatric cancer, either themselves or they know somebody. That's how prevalent it is.
I feel like a lot of people don't know that, because growing up, and even now, like I'm 24, I've had a lot of people tell me, oh, I don't think you had cancer because you're so young. I'm like, I had cancer even younger than I am now. I was 2. And they're like, oh, well, that's not possible. It's a 2-year-old with cancer. I mean, you've seen the commercials, you've seen all those fundraisers and stuff. Do you think it's just for show? It's just like trying to get attention or something? Because it's real. And while, yes, people want to say it's extremely rare, the unfortunate reality is it's not that rare. A lot of, what do you think happens once they survive? They're going to grow up still. They're going to go live life. They're going to go and do things. And the chances of you meeting a childhood cancer survivor who is now an adult isn't unrealistic.
Yeah, no, you absolutely will. You have to be open. You have to be open-minded to understand that it's only rare because that's what the media tells us that it is. That's what the government tells us. That's what the commercials tell us. That's what we're force-fed, that it's a rare problem. But if it was such a rare problem, then why is it that none of us have issues meeting new people every single day that are going through this or are newly diagnosed? In 2020, that number was 43 kids a day get diagnosed with cancer. Now it's 47. So it's obviously not getting better as a problem. And, when we see the commercials, we see the fundraisers, we see all of that, we're kind of made to believe that everything's under control, that everything is good. And I think that hurts our community because it makes people think, well, I don't need to donate. I don't need to understand because it looks like they've got it under control. It's fixed. But now you're growing up. You went to school, you got a job, you live your life every single day, but you live it with the after effects of what you went through. And maybe people don't know, was it harder for you going through school and then harder for you to get a job, do you think, or maybe even just challenging because of what you've gone through?
It was definitely harder to go through school. I could definitely tell that I was different than the other kids. I also struggled a lot more in school because of the learning disabilities, and I was on a strict IEP all throughout school, and it made it very difficult. When I getting a job, I didn't find it too challenging to get a job because I'm very lucky because my dad is really good at, he did a lot of training people and interviews and stuff, and he also did a lot of work like hiring people and stuff. So he helped me write the resume and all this stuff to be what looks good. So I was very lucky with that. And then he also helped me a lot with the practicing interviews so that I could get a job pretty easily. And also I'm in a profession that is very desperate for employees, so that made it easier too. But working, I do find it to be difficult because I'm having to pace myself a lot. After work, I'm exhausted and I'm sleeping a lot. I'm trying not to sleep, but I'm forcing myself not to fall asleep after work because I don't want to sleep the entire evening and then stay awake at night. But I find myself exhausted, and weekends, I just don't want to do a whole lot because I'm very tired.
So let me ask you this then. When you were going through, and I wouldn't know on a personal level, but when you're going through an interview process, as prepared as you are, at some point within that interview process, when do you bring up what you've gone through and how it could affect your ability to do the job?
I don't bring it up. So I was told not to bring it up because a lot of employers, and I'm not saying my job does this. I haven't noticed my job being this way, but I have talked to other employers and stuff who they do take being chronically ill or disabled. They do take that and they see that and you try to use it as a reason not to hire, even though it is illegal and we have laws saying that that's illegal. They will word it in any way they can to make it not illegal, and it will be very difficult to get hired. I'm not saying it's impossible to get hired with that being told in the interview. I'm just saying it's a lot more difficult. The only time I bring it up usually within a few months after being hired, because at that point, if they fire me, it's going to be very obvious that's why they're firing me. Because I did work a job where I was hired and I was being trained, and I'm deaf in my right ear. And so I told them, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to walk away from you, but I'm trying to move around you so that I can hear you when you talk to me. Can you try, if it's possible, I understand if you can't, can you try to stay on my left side? I will move if I have to. And they said, they seemed to be okay with it. Well, then they stopped training me. And then a week later, they had me up in the office saying that they don't want me working here because I'm not being trained fast enough. And I was like, how can I be trained fast enough if I'm not being trained? So that's when I decided that I should probably wait a while before I ever bring that up. I did. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. No, you're completely fine. You go ahead.
I did bring it up in my last interview because they were asking me how I do working with kids with disabilities. And I said, I was thinking, might as well just bring it up because maybe this will make me look good. I said, I was a kid with disabilities, and I know how all that stuff works, and that I think helped me get the job.
Well, honestly, it's a really good explanation, and I completely get it. And you do offer a unique insight, especially that, if they're asking about kids with disabilities or even kids that have maybe even a harder time learning, like you have an insight and kind of a different perspective that you can offer that is actually really unique. And that's a positive side of what you've been through, right? You can take all of that and turn it into something positive that you can help. I see a lot of survivors and even family members of survivors that go into the medical field because of this. They can use that to kind of, you're sitting at the bedside with somebody that now completely understands literally what you're going through, and you feel closer to them. You feel like you can trust them better. So that's actually a really positive thing. I'm glad to hear that you don't, and I don't want to say you use it, and I don't want to call it a disability. You want to use what you've been through to get somewhere in life. You don't want to use that. You don't want to be defined by that. I compare that a lot to my daughters all went to a Catholic school all the way up through 8th grade, and then they went to public high school. And my oldest daughter was very adamant she was not going to tell these people in her high school that didn't know her anything about her sister. She didn't want to be known as that. She wanted to kind of be defined as her own person, and eventually it'll come out when she gets close to people. So this is kind of along those same lines. Like it is something that you have dealt with, and you have succeeded getting through school, getting a job, being able to do something that you enjoy doing, but you don't have to use what you've been through to get ahead. And I like that. I like that. I don't like that people can use a disability as a reason to fire you. And unfortunately, I know they will word things correctly to stay within the law, right? I understand that's a thing. And I also understand that happens because they don't feel like you're going to be as productive as the next person that can hear out of both ears, whatever. But I'm glad that you're able to find something and do something that you love, and you have people that are willing to work with you to make it a positive situation for you, the kids you work with, and the environment that you're in. So that's a good thing, and I'm glad to hear that.